Hi, it's Maddie with the Innocence Topic, and today we're going to be talking about the history of wrongful convictions in the United States. This includes exonerations, posthumous exonerations, and some of the first people to be exonerated in the United States, and how all of this contributed to the creation and legacy of the Innocence Project. Did you know that when you Google wrongful convictions in the United States, the first thing that comes up, at least for me, is a Wikipedia list of all wrongful convictions in the United States? Although, personally, between you and me, I found some that were missing. This includes people whose convictions were overturned or vacated and who have not been retried because the charges were dismissed by the state. It also includes some historical cases of people who have not been formally exonerated, but who historians believe are factually innocent. Which is interesting to me because that means you can be legally guilty and historically innocent. And I've learned it's been the fate for far too many. One of the earliest cases I found of wrongful conviction happened in Vermont in 1819. I found this from the University of Michigan Law School in their National Registry of Exonerations pre-1989, created in partnership with the University of California, Irvine, Newkirk Center for Science and Society, as well as the Michigan State University College of Law. The case of Jesse and Stephen Bourne was really the case of a dead man alive. The two men's brother-in-law, Russell Colvin, in or about 1812, seemingly vanished, and for 7 years that was all that had happened to him, despite rumors and suspicion on the Bourne brothers, until 1819, when the brother's uncle alleged to have seen Russell Colvin's ghost at his bedside in recurring dreams. During these haunting interactions, the ghost of Colvin did not identify his killers, but confided that his body had been disposed of in a cellar on a potato field on the Bourne farm, according to newspaper reports. There was an excavation that turned up nothing. Then later, a dog had dug up bones under a stump close to the cellar, and 3 different doctors confirmed they were human remains. So Jesse Bourne was arrested, and if his brother Stephen Bourne had not moved to New York, he too would have been placed in custody. While in jail, Jesse would be roomed with Silas Merrill, who soon reported that his cellmate had confessed to the murder. As the evidence mounted, Jesse felt the pressure, met with authorities, and confessed to the murder, while placing considerable blame on his brother Stephen, who Jesse may have thought was free from authorities because of how far away he was. But a posse isn't exactly a formal police squad, and that's exactly who was put together to find Stephen Bourne and bring him back across state lines. Once Stephen Bourne arrived, it wasn't long before he confessed, claiming self-defense. It was only after the trial against the brothers began that the physicians recanted their earlier statements and changed their minds about the status of the bones. The physicians now claimed they were animal, not human bones. Despite that, the combination of Merrill's testimony and the admissions of the defendants created enough proof for the brothers to be convicted and sentenced to death. The Vermont legislature commuted Jesse's sentence but let Stephen stand, and left him to be hanged in 1820. It was unforeseeable, but before Stephen was executed, Russell Colvin was found alive in New Jersey. Once he returned to Vermont, it was official. The brothers had been exonerated. Now here's where I point out one key concept, the concept of self-preservation and how it relates to the justice system. Now, Silas Merrill, Jesse's cellmate, was a known conman and manipulator who testified in exchange for release from jail, and after that, Jesse felt trapped and made a confession where he threw his brother under the bus. So when Stephen was gathered and delivered to Vermont police, he confessed and claimed he did kill him, but it was Russell's fault, and he left him no choice. Merrill lied to be released, Jesse lied out of fear and in hopes of a lesser sentence, and Stephen lied because he was even more trapped than Jesse was. So if he did do it, he had to. And this was not the last time someone lied for freedom or favor in the American judicial system. But it is a repeating pattern of the human condition that is unavoidable and, at times, largely ignored. Sometimes people forget that all sides of the judicial system are victims of the human condition, and even those of good intent may feel like they are out of choices, or sometimes, like the uncle in 1818 Vermont, might be quite disillusioned with reality. As stated in episode 1, the most common reason behind a wrongful conviction is the incorrect identification by a witness. And in over 72% of DNA exonerations, that was the leading factor. In 30% of wrongful convictions, there are also false confessions or incriminating statements. Western Michigan University wrote that, quote, confessions are not always prompted by internal knowledge or actual guilt, but are also sometimes motivated by external influences, which I believe couldn't be more true, especially for the case of Gary Dotson. July 9th of 1977, the crime of rape was reported by Kathleen Crowell to a police officer on the street. After being taken to the hospital and assessed for her superficial injuries, her clothing was taken as evidence, and it had the perpetrator's semen in it. It was later that the police asked her to look through a mugshot book to see if anyone looked familiar. They had pressured her to identify a specific person, Gary Dotson, who at the time was 24 and generally matched the description she had given to police on the night of the attack. After Crowell positively identified Dotson in the photo lineup, he was arrested, and the principal evidence presented at trial was the in-court identification combined with the transparently incorrect forensic evidence that supported it. Timothy Dixon was the forensic scientist for the prosecution, and he had testified that he detected type B blood in the stain in Crowell's pants, which led him to conclude the man who committed the crime must be a B secretor, meaning the offender would have to be someone with type B blood who secreted blood antigens into their other bodily fluids. This supported the prosecution because Gary Dotson was a B secretor, and because only 10% of all people are B secretors. Now, while technically some of that was true, they are at best half-truths. Gary Dotson was a B secretor, and it was true there was B antigenic activity in the stain, but it was not true that the semen had to come from Dotson. Kathleen Crowell was a B secretor, and any antigenic activity that took place in the stain could just as easily been from Crowell. Later, Dixon testified that loose hair recovered from the victim were microscopically similar to Dotson's, but this too would soon be revealed to be false. Many viewed the prosecutor, Raymond Garza, or the way he presented his evidence during his closing argument to be manipulative. At the time, it was pre-DNA, which meant that there wasn't actually any technology to definitively prove whether or not it matched his. And the prosecutor called the witnesses of Dotson liars when 4 separate individuals testified to his alibi and said Gary was with them. Even with a few other inconsistencies, like Crowell initially saying her attacker was clean-shaven when Dotson had a mustache, he and nobody he was connected with had a car matching her description. Dotson was sentenced to 25 to 50 years in prison for the violence attack. It was 3 years later, in 1982, that Kathleen Crowell had gotten married and moved to New Hampshire. She let her guilt build and build until she confessed to her pastor in 1985. She had lied. She had consensual sex with her boyfriend at the time and became worried she would become pregnant, so she felt the need to come up with a cover story. So on a summer night in 1977, she invented the graphic crime with no intent on anyone facing consequence. She said she just needed something believable to tell her parents, with no thought of real police involvement. But as the involvement became more and more real, she didn't think she could back out. On the behalf of Kathleen Crowell, now Crowell Webb, Pastor Nannini contacted a lawyer and devout Baptist, John McLario, who agreed to represent Crowell Webb. When he went to contact Cook County State's Attorney Office, they really didn't care. They were uninterested in revisiting the case. It was only when McLario contacted the media and the story broke with the front page of the Chicago Tribune that anyone really addressed the case again. A different lawyer, Warren Lupel, took the case as a favor for one of his clients who Dotson's mother worked for. Dotson was released on a $100,000 bail, with a hearing a week later. During that hearing, the judge determined that Webb's testimony at the first trial was more reliable than her recantation. Bond was revoked, and Dotson was sent back to prison. Even so, public opinion was still on Dotson's side. Lupo capitalized on the favorable sentiment and petitioned the governor at the time, James R. Thompson, for clemency on behalf of Dotson. This was actually great timing for Governor Thompson because he was facing controversy from the mishandling of a salmonella outbreak. There was a dairy plant suspected to be the cause of a salmonella outbreak, but Thompson still allowed them to distribute dairy and continue operating. This was the worst salmonella outbreak in U.S. history at that time. So when Thompson received a request for clemency, he declared that it demanded his personal attention in the interest of justice, which is very unusual, as no Illinois governor had presided over a clemency hearing until then. It was described as a 3-day media spectacle. At the end, the Prison Review Board decided to hold up his sentence. Thompson agreed and said the evidence of guilt was actually stronger than it was before. And then the governor commuted Dotson's sentence to time served, claiming Dotson popular but guilty. At this point, Dotson was practically put on parole, so anything he did outside of prison that got him in trouble with the law would send him right back to serve his full 25 to 50 year sentence. And after he was released, he struggled a lot with alcohol abuse and he ended up marrying a young bartender. But one day there was a dispute and he ended up being arrested. He was given numerous chances by the governor, who again thought he was guilty. He was imprisoned again. While Dotson was in prison, they tried a new DNA test known as RFLP, or restriction fragment length polymorphism. I'm not great with biology, so I can't really explain the test, but I can tell you it was inconclusive because there wasn't enough material due to degradation of evidence. The governor said, "We gave it our best shot, as far as it's humanly possible to go in the search of truth." But that wasn't quite true because there was one other kind of DNA test called PCR PCR, or polymerase chain reaction testing. This testing could work on degraded DNA and could conclusively exclude or include suspects. That's exactly what happened. In 1988, Dotson was positively excluded as the perpetrator. Thompson was asked to grant unconditional clemency on the basis of actual innocence. Dotson was released to an involuntary hold in residential treatment for alcohol and substance abuse. After 12 years, in 1989, Dotson was officially cleared. Since then, he had gone under treatment for alcohol abuse, got divorced, considered writing a book, but has since said he is staying under the radar, living quietly in a southern Chicago suburb, hoping to put all of this behind him. So to conclude, the two examples I have explained are cases of crimes that never were. Outside of overzealous law enforcement, I think the results were of fear. In the case of Gary Dotson, Kathleen was scared that she would become pregnant and was scared of how her foster parents would react. She was a kid, but old enough to know better. I think it got too out of hand for her, and I don't know if Governor Thompson would have gotten involved had it not been for his need of public approval. And his involvement was pretty questionable to me because he did believe he was guilty and released him anyways. A man's life was in shambles for over a decade because a teen girl did something incredibly selfish and cops were too interested in a conviction to notice any inconsistencies. The governor involved probably would have not cared had he not needed to, due to the public awareness of the case and his own mishandling of other governmental duties. As people, we are inconsistent, self-interested, and most importantly, sometimes wrong. While our justice system is imperfect, it has been the best we have come up with. DNA and other evidence is important to improve the faults in our system. While the Innocence Project did not work on this case, it shows how faulty our justice system can be and how concrete DNA evidence is within the courts. It's proof of its matter and gave more reason to Barry Scheck and Peter Newfield, the founders of the Innocence Project, to create the foundation, so more people would have access to the groundbreaking evidence, and hopefully have access before a decade had passed.